Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It's Philip Wilkerson. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on my show. I am joined by Miss Taylor Nikki Harris, or goes by Nikki. But before we get started, Nikki, give the listeners a little background on who you are.
Yeah, so like Phil said, my name is Nikki Harris. I'm a first-generation college student from Southwest Virginia, a really, really tiny town called Honaker. So I grew up there all my life. I did my undergrad at Berea College in Kentucky, and I did my master's degree at Eastern Kentucky University. And so now I'm here at George Mason, working towards a PhD in higher education. And so I guess I'm a professional nerd. My parents always said I didn't have anything better else to do than to go to school, and so that's why I'm still in school, I guess.
Yeah, shout out to that. I just felt like doing a clap emoji about being a professional nerd, obviously. And so obviously, you know, we connected. I learned a little bit about your journey and learned about where you grew up and just how much pride you have in your home. So tell us a little bit more about, was it Honaker? Honaker. Okay, Honaker. Tell us a little bit more about that, where you grew up.
Yeah, so it's a really tiny town. There's about 1,500 people, so really, really tiny. It's a traditional, Appalachian town. There's no grocery store there. I graduated with about 100 students, so I knew everyone from kindergarten to high school graduation, and so those were my people. My parents, they grew up there, so they, obviously they stuck around. They really loved it as well. Fun fact, they actually moved to the DC area in the 80s, and then they, had the experience of living in the city, and then they ultimately decided to return home and raise me and my brother. And so I've kind of gone on this journey of where I wasn't really proud of my hometown at first when I went to undergrad, just because of all of the stereotypes that exist of being from Appalachia. But now, I'm a little older now, and I really appreciate my hometown. I actually have pride in, standing up for my people, because we are kind of looked down upon in society versus, with everything going on in politics, it's oftentimes, the poor people or the people from Appalachia, they're the reasons why Mitch McConnell is in office, whereas, there's really dynamic people from, my hometown. My dad, he, in some ways is the stereotypical Appalachian dad. He wears all camo, he hunts and he fishes, but he has such a cool brain. Like, he can really build anything with his hands, and he always is questioning things. And so I think my natural tendency to question and be a learner comes from him, because he's always questioning, always asking questions. And so I think, being from Appalachia, it's really a dynamic identity, because you really, when you leave, you're into worlds, because unfortunately, you're always told to leave to find better opportunities and jobs. But then ultimately, the downside of that is you're looked down upon for leaving. I've been away now for like 7 years, and people still ask my mom, well, when is Nikki coming back? But the whole time growing up, my parents told me to leave and, don't come back. And so it's this really, odd cycle of, where do I fit in now? Because, I don't really necessarily fit in with my hometown anymore, but I also don't fit in here because of where I'm from and how I grew up.
So, I mean, for the listeners too, just curious, how do you define Appalachia? Because, I'm learning new, I'd heard of the Appalachian or Appalachian state, things that had the word Appalachia in it. the Appalachia Trail, which
Yeah.
I'm learning all these things, but how do you define Appalachia?
Yeah, so Appalachia is, a 13-state region. It stretches from Pennsylvania all the way down to like Mississippi and Georgia. But even in Appalachia, there's subregions. So, for me growing up, it was, the Blue Ridge Mountains was part of the, Appalachian Mountains. And really for me, being someone who claims the identity of being an Appalachian, I just claim it as I'm part of the mountains because I grew up in the mountains. There's no flatlands back home. And so really just being, resilient is also a part of that identity because there aren't a lot of resources back home. And so, people have to really work hard for just advocating for themselves, but also just getting their basic resources. And I think resiliency is also part of that identity, while also we're a little bit stubborn too. And I've had stereotypes, or people have pointed out my accent multiple times, even though I'm away. I've been away from my hometown, but just always kind of standing my ground and being there's so much more to me other than my accent, or other than that you think I grew up with no access to water or have a an outhouse bathroom. And so just trying to always push those stereotypes because Appalachia is really dynamic. There's a lot of people there. There's also people of color there, which people didn't really know. And so
I was about to ask that too. I was I've never heard of a black apple. I mean, I've not heard of it, but I'm pretty sure there's black folks everywhere. So there's a
not in my hometown, but other regions of Appalachia, Kentucky, for example, they do have a lot of people of color there. But for me, growing up, there wasn't any color. So going to college was really my first experience to diversity and international students, and also being outside of my bubble of Appalachia and my little, small town in Southwest Virginia, to the other regions of Appalachian, like Kentucky and Mississippi, and, all the people who claim the Appalachian identity there. And so just want to, be an advocate and say Appalachia is complex, and, we're not the scapegoat for all of the things that are wrong.
I know where you're going with that, the non-educated or backwards, or they,
and
certain things happen like that because who's voting, and you look at who's voting in this area and all that stuff. I kind of get where you're treading.
And my dad, he fits into that non-educated group, I guess, because he doesn't have a high school degree, so he dropped out in middle school. And so, I mean, if you see him on the street, he dresses in all camo. He, hunts and fish, and his accent is arguably probably way worse than mine, and so he definitely fits that identity. And sometimes he plays on that just because he honestly finds it funny. But when I bring him around people, I'm still very self-conscious of how people are going to respond to him, because he is
it's different.
He's just different, and people they hear his voice, and that just gives it away. And so, he may not care that people make fun of him behind his back, but I do. And so, trying to, keep my family and my people safe, because, they are good people, and they deserve to be respected just like anybody else.
So, I heard about this mindset, this tug between two worlds. Do you feel like there's this narrative that you have to go to grow? Like you have to leave the Appalachian area to grow? And I'm very curious for that two-sided part. Like, how did your parents, what were they doing when they came up here in the D.C. area and before they returned?
Yeah, so my dad, he was a carpenter, and so he came for jobs. So he and my uncle, actually my mom's brother, that's kind of how they met. My dad and her brother worked together, and so that's kind of how they met. And so when they were up here, my dad was a carpenter, and my mom just kind of worked at Food Lion. She worked at a tanning salon. They actually lived in Manassas, and they told me about Yorkshire restaurant. That's where their first date was. I haven't been yet, but apparently it still exists. And so they were just up here for jobs, but they would still make frequent trips back home because my grandparents are there. Both my grandparents were still there. And so I think even for them, they got the message of they have to leave to like have opportunities, but I don't think it was as strong as it was with me. And maybe, even with me, they may not even notice like that's how the message came across to me as, there's nothing for you here. If you decide to go to college, what are you going to do after? Because there aren't a lot of jobs. You're either a teacher, a coal miner, or you work at a hospital. Like those are really the options for professional jobs back home. And so, it is, I struggle and still struggle because I was only, one of maybe like 5 students who of my high school graduating class left. And so, all my friends.
Oh, well, so you said you graduated with 100 people.
Yeah.
Only 5, mostly 5 out of that 100. So 5% went to post-secondary education.
Me and then 4 other people.
Yes, I'm saying,
yeah.
Wow, that's 5%.
Yeah, and
quick
so,
math.
quick math. I'm terrible at math.
No, that was me too. I was really proud of myself for that 5 out of 100. So that's a really low.
Yeah, so a lot of students don't pursue post-secondary education back home. I think now there's a pipeline program with the local community college where they can go there for tuition free. But when I was there, that wasn't a thing. And so you really, you had to have a scholarship or you probably weren't going anywhere. And so, even then, the students who, went away, they may not have succeeded and obtained their degree. And so, there is that message too where, my class, we may not have had the appropriate resources to be successful when we went to college because, there wasn't AP classes, there wasn't dual enrollment classes, we weren't always academically challenged. And so just, that aspect too of making sure those students are prepared, we not everyone just kind of had that. And so, yeah, it's definitely a 2-part message where I think it's still there, and I don't know if it'll ever go away because, there's also not jobs coming into the area. And so, obviously, if there aren't jobs coming in, then people, have to leave, but then you're judged if you leave. So it's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
And you don't know what to do. And so, I think, also the message for me versus my brother was very different in terms of you have to leave and go out and go away to college. My brother didn't. He just went to the community college, which is fine. That's an acceptable way to get your education too. But I don't think he feels the same pressure.
The push. He doesn't see it in the film.
Yeah.
And is the local community college have a lot in regards to transferable to go to college? Do they have a lot of vocational training at this community college where they can say get a trade at the community college too?
Yeah, so there is there's lots of trades with welding, carpeting, those types of things, car diesel stuff. That's there too. My brother was in the 2-year X-ray tech program, so those the two-way tech degree, nursing, those hospital degrees. And so those, my brother loves his job and that's his way of life, but the push to leave and not come back is not the same. And so even within families, you could have a student or someone leave and never come back, and then someone who kind of stays and keeps the family roots down. So even within Appalachia, those families are dynamic. And so there's not ever going to be a consistent message across families, but I think it definitely, if you're the first person to leave, you're always going to have that message of you left us, or and my parents don't do it in a negative way, but my town's very small, we all know each other. People will come up to my mom in the grocery store and say, when's Nikki coming back, or what is she doing, why is she gone for so long? And I think the ironic part is these people, they don't have any contact with me. I graduated high school and I have maybe 2 or 3 friends from high school that I still contact with, but the people who seem to be like so concerned about me leaving are people who don't reach out to me. And so, I'm always curious as to like why they're asking that, because, is it like they're just curious and they really want to know, or are they really like being judgmental? And so, being from a small town, it's two sides. It's probably both. Who knows?
Do you feel like they think of you as like, I don't know what the word, bougie or uppity, or like you're the city girl, college girl? I don't know what the
or as my dad says, city slicker, but he says it in a funny way. But I think people probably do feel that way, because it's not often that people leave and don't come back. So there's a lot of like generational poverty back home. My dad's family, for example, he's traced it back to like the early 1800s, that like they've been in Southwest Virginia, and most of my cousins are still back there. And so it's not common for people to like leave and not come back. And I'm older now, and I'm of the mindset that I probably will go back, but in my undergrad years I was very against going back. So I kind of had my own evolution of being proud and like wanting to go back, because I think I've just kind of evolved my perception of like what it means to like be someone from a small town and from Appalachia. And I think every person who leaves probably goes through that, because you're also like, you're always taught to leave. So once you leave, it's like, oh, like I'm going to distance myself as far as I can from where I come from.
That's interesting. One of the things I was thinking about, going back to your college experience, and just, how eye-opening was that? Was it like, and you said 1 in 5. Were you one of the people that got a scholarship to go?
Yes. So I went to Berea College. It's a tuition-free school, and so it truly changed my life. I wish I could go back to that place, because they truly supported students in the way that it should be done. Not only most of the students there were from Appalachia or first-gen students. They also had a good population of international students, and it's located in Berea, Kentucky, and it's the first co-educational interracial like college of the South. So there's a lot of like history from the Civil War, in this college, and it's truly a special place. And that's where really I got to interact with so many people. I made my first friends from like Bangladesh and other countries, while also like just interacting with people who were different than me, who were still from Appalachia, but they had different experiences. And so it like changed my life.
Gotcha. And so how'd you get that scholarship? I mean, well, you said tuition free. How'd you find them? You was in high school, you saw a pamphlet or a school counselor?
So I was in the Upper Bound program, and so they fun fact, my cousin had actually applied there when I was in 8th grade, but as an 8th grader, you don't really care what your cousin's doing. And so I would say like that's when it first like became on my radar. But then my Upper Bound counselors, they really kind of pushed it. They actually took me on my first tour there. They actually nominated me for the Bonner Scholar Award there, which was like an award for a student who was in like civic engagement and science. And so I got that award, and so I went back again, and I was like, this is just the place. It was, I didn't really see myself going to like tech or something. My parents would probably be terrified if I ended up at tech.
I can imagine a college visit from like not seeing a lot of people to tech being overwhelming. Because from my understanding, I bet Berea was the whole class, the whole school body was like, 1,500 students?
Yeah, Berea was very, very tiny. And so, it was a big enough place because they had a Walmart in their town, which I thought was super cool.
Was it a normal Walmart or Walmart Supercenter?
It was Walmart Supercenter.
Oh, that's big.
So,
that's big time. That's what Harrisonburg had too.
So, coming from a town that didn't have that, I thought like I was living the best life.
Yeah.
And so it really, truly was a special place. And they really... they supported me, and not only in the classroom, but also the outside activities. So my first plane ride was with Berea, because they took their education studies seniors to like a field trip. And so we got to go to Philadelphia, and that was my first time being on a plane. And so they paid for all that too, which was really super cool. And so they really, their mission of student success and student, development is truly, truly inspiring. And it really, it saved my life, really.
Yeah, so technically, let's also dial back. Like, in proximity to, I don't know, I'm not good at geography. How close is it to rural Appalachia?
From like Berea to my hometown, it's 4.5 hours.
Okay.
And so I would say, Berea still considered Appalachia, but not as like mountainous.
Okay.
So it's pretty like flat land, as my dad would describe. But all of the students, they pulled from like the mountainous regions of Appalachia.
That's what I'm saying. So like, let's say if you were there, you could still have that hometown.
Yeah.
And work at that college and still feel like you're part of the Appalachia community and region in that college.
And they were really strategic in like giving back to the community. So every student had like a service learning credit, what it was called, and we had to do either a class or a project where you were out in the community giving back. And so some of those classes was like a sociology class where I got to partner with the economic development team of Berea. And so we got to like do a whole presentation as to like what college students want from Berea. Because Berea, even though like I thought it was like big enough for me, for some other students, they were like, oh, there's nothing to do, because it wasn't the traditional college town of like, there's bars, there's like clubs everywhere. Very, you had like a historical town square and the Walmart.
That's it. I mean, I guess you can get booze at Walmart.
Yeah.
Do your thing, you know what I'm saying?
I mean, there was still ways. We're still mischievous.
Yeah,
so.
I'm saying you're still in college. Was there off campus, like dorms and stuff?
So students were not allowed to live off campus until your senior year. So it was very residential.
Okay, you there. You're on the grounds.
Yeah, you are there. Like I said, didn't stop people from being mischievous.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, so when did this app, in this journey, did you think, oh, let me pursue the next level and keep going with your education?
So I think it's always been there. I knock on wood, I complete my PhD. I'll be the first on both sides of my family to have a PhD. And so there's a lot of pride in that. My parents, like I said, my dad's high school dropout. My mom has her high school degree, but they didn't, they have no idea what college is. They don't understand what I'm doing, but they're super dang proud.
Yeah. But they know you're writing papers at least, right?
They know I'm writing papers. They know, I'm learning and doing all those things. And so I would say it's always been there. I remember being a freshman at Berea, and, boys are dumb as freshmen. And I had told someone, I'm thinking about doing my PhD, and a guy said, oh, well, like, you're going to be in a lot of debt. Like, why would you want to do that? And I remember it just, like, irritated me, because I was like, well, why are you trying to tell me no? Like, I'm going to do it anyway. And so,
or find a way to fund it. You know what I'm saying? I'll make it work.
Yeah. And so, I would say, when I started at Berea, my initial interests were in like political science and government. And so, obviously like that shifted more into like education, but I think it was always, in the background. And I think also there's a lot of pressure in being the first to like, first gen of like undergrad, grad school, and then PhD. But I think there's also a lot of pride for it, because I really am like hopefully changing like the generational trajectory of both sides of my family.
Community is very important. And I think, allowing through social media, you can connect. Have you connected with other, I know there's first gen groups everywhere, but is there like Appalachian doctoral student group or just like, I don't know, a community that you can find? Have you found that kind of community?
Yeah, so I think I am a part of like Empowering First Generation Students group. I think the Appalachian groups were slowly getting there, because I think we're just tired of all the stereotypes and, all the people trying to like knock us down. But I think, people struggle with the shame part of being from Appalachia, because, there are a lot of stereotypes, and then there's also, not a lot of resources. And so you don't know what you don't know as to like how like the world is, or how like others will actually like perceive you and like, your good work and things like that. So I think, hopefully, maybe I can create an Appalachian doctoral studies group.
You got to find some other people. Have you heard? Have you
Not here.
Not in Northern Virginia, but just I don't know, like when you go into you gone to NSBEs or anything yet?
No.
NASPA, NASPA.
I've done NASPA virtually, so I haven't
I don't
had
know.
a chance.
Maybe you should just go when you go in one of the groups. Say, is anyone in this group from Appalachian?
Yeah.
See who, from all, because it's a national thing. Because I'd be very curious, like you said, make your own space. But I'm pretty sure. Maybe at Mason, this is a small microcosm, but if you look nationally, I'm pretty sure there's got to be at least 20 or something.
Yeah. And I think I had a really good mentor when I was in grad school at Eastern Kentucky University. Fun fact, he was actually from Southwest Virginia.
Okay.
And he was the first person that I saw from like a town that I recognized have their PhD. And he really, I think, my relationship with him, that's when my perception shifted of being proud of Appalachia, because he was loud and proud. Like he had the traditional like Appalachian beard as a professor, and so I think he was definitely a good mentor for me to have, because he really did shift my perception on like it's okay to be loud and proud and like talk in your accent and talk about cornbread and soup beans and bring that to potlucks. And so I think it's good to have that representation, because it's not always easy to like see, because as my dad says, like when I go home they think that my accent has changed, but when I come back people say that my accent has changed. So it's like getting like two worlds. It's two worlds.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. Like, obviously, I mean, call it code switching, whatever you want to call it, but that's true. I mean, code switching is not only for, black people at work. It's for any person that has to feel like a different identity in different spaces. It's like an interesting story. Like one of my friends that is first generation in America, when he went back to China, we went on a study abroad trip. And he was speaking fluent. They said he sounded weird. It's like, but he was speaking. So it's very interesting how people can pick up on that stuff. So I do, one of my last questions before we go to my next segment is then, as you navigated this pride and as you navigated this, if you could talk to your younger self, the early freshman college, when you talk like similar to that boy, what would you tell yourself? About where you are in your journey now, or just anything? Like, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I would. Oh my God. I would say it's okay to be proud of your hometown. That whether you like it or not, it's always going to be a part of you, and you will get to a point where you will want to protect it, and you should do it. You should not be afraid to do it. You should not be afraid to, stand up for your people. And then I would also say, you're going to do it. Like, I remember I didn't even think like 2 years ago I would actually like be in a PhD program. And so I would just say, as my dad says, keep your head on straight and you're going to get there.
I love it. All right, well, we're going to go to the next segment. It's called Shot for Shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first? I'll go first.
You go first.
All right, so it was kind of related. So, like, let's say you can go back to your hometown with these skills that you have. What would be one thing you would want to do to support or enhance or really get back to your hometown once it's all said and done?
I would work with my local library. And when I was back home, I was really active in working with my local library. I was part of the teen advisory board there. And the local library is super important because that's really the only place where kids can get internet access, because not a lot of families have internet access. My parents being one of them, we cannot get internet access at my house. And so really the library was the one place where I could go and like be online and do my college applications and do all those things. And so I think that would be the first place I would start, because oddly enough, it doesn't have a lot of funding. And so, even in these, small towns, people are utilizing these resources, but it's only open like 3 days a week. And so that's not helpful for everyone. And so trying to get resources to these communities, that way they can do the work that needs to get done.
Well, that's a barrier. Like, how are you going to do your homework if you keep
Yeah,
up.
and especially for me, it was really weird during the pandemic because obviously I was up here and I was seeing, Fairfax County was getting like laptops and iPads.
Yes, yes.
And my hometown, they were trying to send out hotspots to families. And even then, the hotspots weren't working because some of the people live in really like mountainous parts of the county.
Broadband
and
access.
So, broadband access is super, super important. And, people here, I tell it to them that, my hometown doesn't have internet access. Like, I went home in August. I joked that I'm living off the grid. Like, I will not have access to emails. Like, I won't be able to help with anything. And, I say it, but I don't think they realize that there are places in America like that still exist. And, these kids, they're growing up in places like this, and then they come to college, and it's like everything's technology heavy, and they've never had that one-to-one connection with technology. So obviously, like, how are they supposed to use it effectively if they've never had consistent access to it? So, yeah.
Wow, that's really, that could be another day. And
yeah.
Internet access. I think that's also legislation and broadband. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
There's lots of pockets, and I think you brought up a really good, thing about like schools and resources. Certain schools were getting whole MacBooks and Chromebooks.
Yeah.
And like, wow, that's crazy. And think about systemically, that sets them up because like our kids, Fairfax County is technically one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, and probably one of the most DMV. This area is probably one of the most educated, per capita. I think they said people with graduate degrees per capita is like no other in the whole DC area, right? Just the embedding of highly educated, wealthy people that come to the DC area. But that lens is not applicable, or not that lens or that way to live life is not representative of a lot of places in America.
Yeah, and I will say, going back to like Nova versus like the rest of the state of Virginia, like there are those, I guess, tensions there because, growing up, my cousin was like on the academic team, and so he would, travel to all like the state stuff, and so he was interacting with people like outside of Southwest Virginia, and so like, kids are mean, whatever, and so, but like even the kids would have stereotypes against like the academic team from like my small town. And so I remember when I first, announced that I, got a job up here and was moving up here, some of the questions I got asked was like, oh, like you're going to like where the money is, or oh, like you're going to where like all the city slickers are, like, you're gonna forget like where you come from. And so, there is that tension there because, my hometown has a perception of Nova as like Nova's taking all the money, Nova gets all the resources, like the state doesn't care about Southwest Virginia. And on the flip side, Nova has a perception of us of like, oh, like
You're
backwards, hillbilly, you don't have access to like a bathroom, water, like all those things. And so, like I said, for someone like me, I'm in both. I'm like, what do I do? What do I say? Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to oddly try to fit in with both worlds, and I don't think I'll ever fit in, and I think I'll eventually have to like get to a place where like I'm okay with that. But yeah, it's definitely hard because when I first said I was going home, like people thought I was from West Virginia, and I was like, no, like it's still right here, still in the state of Virginia. And so even geographically, people may not realize like how diverse Virginia is. That could be another topic for another day too.
Yeah. So what's your question for me?
Oh my God, I was talking. I forgot my questions. So I guess I know you mentioned earlier you were kind of like learning a little bit about Appalachia, like with the podcasts and things I've been sharing. What have been some of the things you've been like surprised about?
Well, I like that Instagram page you shared. It was very knowledgeable, and like I just went down the rabbit hole. And I think this is my perception. There definitely the progressive side of Appalachia, like the host of that show that you were watching. Just I always had this really streamlined, anti-LGBTQ, anti-this, anti-that, and the host was, I think the female host is like, I identify as gay or lesbian, and I just didn't think that there was a identity that was Appalachia and LGBTQ. Like I thought it was just very homogeneous, like very same. There's no diversity. Like even, like I said, diversity, but even different identities in regards to ideology diversity or sexual orientation diversity or I don't know, maybe religious and like I said, I didn't know there was any black people. So that kind of diversity, I'm learning that through this thing. So it's almost like that's why I wanted to have you on the show because like you're my first, highly educated person from that area that I'm understanding as I've learned and navigated, this podcast and learning. I just learned that there's so many intersections of identities that there is no just one way to represent Appalachia. Similar to being a black person, it's not monolithic. So I think that's what I learned from going down the rabbit hole on that social media. I was like, wow, they're hitting on some topics that I agree with, and they're at a baseball game. Like, oh, they go to a baseball game. Like I don't know how close it was, but it was just I think the people that share that content on social media or through books or through just being able to educate others outside that sphere, it's necessary because like you learn that there's just so many unique experiences to the human existence, and like you can't, this sounds generic, cliche. You can't judge a book by its cover. Yeah. Like you can't judge a person by its cover.
And I would say like even though we're in a space where we're around highly educated people, like we can still have like those stereotypes of like only one type of like people exist in a space, and I think it is really cool to like see Appalachia on social media like trend in a positive way because it's always been so negative, I would say. And so I think having that podcast and like there's authors like Silas House who are also activists, and so having those people in the space and like leading the younger generations to be more active and be more like, hey, like it's I'm me, like this is where I'm from, like it's okay. And I think, hopefully we'll continue that. It's always like a, throughout history, a vicious cycle of, Appalachia being, looked down upon, but hopefully we'll get to a space where we're kind of have a seat at the table and our voices are being heard.
I was also about to say, just because you're educated don't mean you can't be ignorant. Let's be real. Hey, the smart people. So you could be a very book smart, educated person and say the most ignorant, vile things. Yeah. So like, I think that's just another thing that I'm learning is like, you need to, if you truly are a lifelong learner, not just rely on your degrees to be a learner. Like learning is learning from people and exposing and. Once you get to just because you have a degree doesn't mean you don't need to start learning and reading and really educating yourself on the human experience, right? So like, yeah, man, you met some professor and you could be like, wow, this guy's got a doctorate and says the most ignorant, racist, homophobic, what's it called? Xenophobic, nationalistic, just terrible things. Education is outside the classroom. Yeah. And so.
Yeah, and I also think it's being mindful of, like, you don't know who's in the room listening. I think, it's always worse around election time for people from Appalachia because you hear things, you hear stereotypes, and I remember being in a space where people were talking about like, oh, like they don't understand like why people would vote a certain way or, why people from Appalachia are potentially like racist. And at that point in time I didn't have the confidence to speak up when I should have. And that's one memory that when I'm talking with people I always like bring it up because it was in a space of like higher education and all the people who were all about like supporting students and everything, but there are students at every university that are from these small towns, and if they like walk into a space and like hear people talking that way, like they're gonna, feel less likely to come to us for like certain things. And so, like I said, I didn't have the confidence back then to like stand up and say like, hey, like I'm gonna push back on like what you're saying because that's not always right. Obviously.
It's not representative of everybody.
Yeah.
You're making very blatant and
Yeah.
you're making very stereotypical, like I said, that ideology.
Yeah.
Like I said, one of the things I learned one of the things I'm learning currently, like I said, is that regional ideology is not blanketed.
Yeah.
Like you assume a certain group of people from where they all think the same way,
Yeah.
and that's not true at all.
Yeah.
Maybe a majority, or maybe the ones that are very vocal, at the poll. I don't know at the polls, but that is also not representative of everyone.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's diversity of religion, diversity of backgrounds, and I'm learning that through the resources you share. But I think that is probably hard when you hear people make generalized statements about a regional statements, and that's not everybody.
Yeah, and it's also, it neglects the complexity. Like there are people back home who are racist. Like
there's people here that are racist.
Yeah, like I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Like those people exist. But they're. There's the perception on the other side. So, like, for example, people back home, it tends to be more of the economic argument. Like, like I mentioned earlier, Nova gets all the resources. DC's not sending us the resources. And so for, like, my hometown specifically, there wasn't a lot of diversity. So, of course, they're not going to understand, like,
that's their experience.
The racial issues that are going on in this country. And so... I wish people would just be mindful of the complexity, whether it's like Appalachia, but, all the other identities that are representative of the U.S., that it's way more complex than what the media makes it out to be. And so, just being mindful of there could be potentially students who are like struggling with, my parents in my hometown is like this, but I'm hearing all these messages, at the university. And so, it's definitely, complex. And I will say, Berea, so far of all the institutions, have probably propped Appalachian students up more because of their mission to the region. But I think, it's definitely hard.
Yeah, it's got a long way to go. And I think education is good. I think things are better, and maybe you'll open up a satellite campus to that Berea in your hometown, or a community, or be the president of that community college.
My parents wish they are now pushing me to come back home.
Hey, Dr. Harris. Harris might be the provost of that community college. You know what I'm saying? You got the credentials. You'll be a doctor, and so they'll be like, "Oh man, you want a job at this community college?" And you'll be recruiting future Nickies to your school.
Yeah, I always joke that right now I'd be run out of town because I'm sharing a lot of things on social media of the progressive people from Appalachia, but my hometown is very, very unique. So I would currently probably be run out if I went to go for the community college. But I think also with the sort of rise of social media, kids from my hometown, they're seeing the other side of Appalachia with the podcasts that are being shared. There was a Pride Parade this summer, in a city near my hometown. They, are doing a lot of more activism stuff in the region. And so I think, hopefully, this new generation coming up will have more access and opportunities to see Appalachia through a different set of eyes. I
think, yeah. Well, we gotta wrap. We could probably keep on going. We keep on going back. We're supposed to do one shot for shot. This is great. But I think, you definitely have something. So now we're at the part of the show called shout outs and plugs. So shout outs, you get to show any love to anyone you want to show love to. Show love, whatever. And then plugs. These are ways that you feel comfortable with the listeners following up with you, or things that you're working on. So and whatever you share is what so shout outs and plugs.
Well, I got a shout out to my parents because they definitely put me on the right path. I would say they're definitely the reason why I'm still going through my PhD. And I would also say all my mentors that I've had at Berea and EKU and even here at Mason, they've definitely supported me in different ways and have just encouraged me to keep going. And then, if you want to reach out to me, I'm on social media. Add me on Facebook, Nikki Harris. You can also email me as well. My email's pretty long. Should I share that?
No, I was about to say
Okay.
you're on LinkedIn. You're on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn
LinkedIn,
too.
and we'll do LinkedIn and we'll do Facebook, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure to put those in the show notes. You don't have to do the full government. I don't want you to get out there. Whatever it is, you're about to give everything. And then my PayPal and my Venmo.
No, I'm not gonna. I am good about that. I'm not gonna give you my bank account.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no. But Nikki, thank you so much. I think we really learned something today. I think we had a really robust discussion, and definitely appreciate you. And like I said, now we're in this journey. I looked up to you, and I did ask you some information about being a PhD student. So, you're going to be finished way before me. So you'll probably now have to be my mentor, in this journey to PhD-ness if I finish or start. I don't know. I'm just starting one class at a time. But
we're in this together.
Well, I'm definitely proud of you, and I definitely see you're doing it each year. You're accomplishing these goals. You're going to be Dr. Harris, and you're going to go down there and change the world, change Appalachia. So, Positive Filter listeners, if you like this episode, please share it with a family member or friend. Give it a rating or a review on Apple or Spotify. That helps elevate the podcast. If you want to leave a voicemail for the podcast, it's 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. Sometimes I take those voicemails and throw them onto the episodes. Sharing positivity is a movement. As I said earlier, every single episode is dedicated to my father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch, and I will be putting in the show notes his Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund. Definitely support the work that he's done throughout his whole career, and I'm just really proud to be his son-in-law. And additionally, subscribe to the Positive Filter newsletter. I'll be doing weekly emails to my listeners about show recaps and just some other resources. I'll be on the lookout for that. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity a Movement. Thanks for listening.